At our anniversary party, she screamed, "Yes, we're sleeping together. He's better, now get out." So I calmly raised my glass and walked away. That moment would define everything that came after, but it started 2 years earlier when I thought I'd found someone who understood what real partnership meant. I met Brittany at my college friend Dave's wedding reception, where she was working as the event coordinator. I was standing by the bar, watching her orchestrate the evening with impressive precision, directing vendors and managing last-minute crises with this magnetic confidence that drew everyone's attention. She had this way of making chaos look effortless, turning potential disasters into seamless moments that made the couple's day perfect. When she finally took a break around midnight, I approached her with a genuine compliment about her work, and instead of the polite brush-off I expected, she launched into this passionate explanation about why she loved creating perfect moments for people. "Most guys think event planning is just picking flowers and colors," she said, eyes lighting up as she talked. "But it's really about understanding what makes people feel loved and celebrated, then building that feeling into every single detail." I found myself genuinely fascinated by her perspective, the way she saw her work as crafting experiences rather than just organizing parties. We talked until the venue staff started stacking chairs around us, covering everything from her business dreams to my structural engineering projects, and I realized I hadn't thought about work stress or project deadlines once during our entire conversation. She seemed equally intrigued by my methodical approach to problem-solving, asking detailed questions about bridge designs and building safety calculations with genuine curiosity rather than polite interest. "You bring stability to things," she observed as we exchanged numbers. "I bet you make people feel safe without them even realizing it." For the first 18 months, we complemented each other perfectly in ways that felt almost effortless. I provided grounding for her chaotic schedule of weekend events and crisis management, while she brought adventure and spontaneity to my structured routine of early mornings and predictable weekends. She dragged me to last-minute gallery openings or surprise picnics she'd planned during lunch breaks, and I'd introduce her to quiet hiking trails and cooking experiments that helped her decompress from her high-energy work environment. Our differences felt like puzzle pieces that clicked together naturally, creating something stronger than either of us could build alone. I loved watching her transform ordinary spaces into magical experiences for her clients, and she seemed to appreciate how I thought through problems systematically, always considering long-term consequences before making decisions. "You're the only person I know who actually makes me want to slow down sometimes," she told me one evening as we cooked dinner together in my apartment. "Most people just add to the chaos, but you create these pockets of calm that make everything else make sense." I thought I'd found someone who valued the same things I did, building something real together, supporting each other's goals, creating a foundation that could weather whatever came next. Looking back, I realized those early months were probably the most genuinely happy either of us had ever been, before ambition and outside influences started pulling us in different directions. The changes started subtly around month 18, coinciding with Brittany's growing partnership with Marcus Caldwell, who'd co-invested in expanding their event planning company into corporate retreats and luxury weddings. Marcus was everything I wasn't: spontaneous where I was methodical, charming where I was reserved, and possessed of that effortless social confidence that made clients feel like they were his closest friends within minutes of meeting him. I first noticed the shift during Brittany's late-night, emergency planning sessions, which seemed to happen exclusively when Marcus was involved, usually requiring her presence at venues or client meetings that stretched well past normal business hours. "Marcus has this vision for transforming the whole industry," she explained one evening as she rushed out to meet him for what she called a crucial strategy session at 9 p.m. "He understands that we're not just planning events, we're curating experiences that people will remember forever." I started hearing Marcus's name woven into conversations about everything from vendor negotiations to creative concepts, always accompanied by glowing descriptions of his innovative approaches and bold business strategies. She'd come home energized from their collaborations, talking animatedly about surprise elements he'd suggested for upcoming weddings or the way he'd charmed difficult clients into doubling their budgets. Marcus surprised the Henderson bride with a flash mob proposal recreation during her venue walkthrough. She told me with obvious admiration, "Can you imagine thinking of something that's spontaneous and romantic?" That's the kind of creative thinking that sets us apart from every other planning company in the city. I began to notice how she'd compare his gesture to my more practical approach to showing affection, suggesting I could learn from his flair for dramatic romantic surprises. When I mentioned feeling uncomfortable with how much time she spent with Marcus, especially during evening and weekend hours, she became defensive and accused me of not understanding the demands of building a successful business. "This is my career, Ryan, not some hobby I can put on a schedule that fits your comfort level," she said with an edge to her voice I'd never heard before. Marcus gets that sometimes you have to sacrifice personal time to create something extraordinary. The inside jokes started appearing around month 20, references to shared experiences and conversations I wasn't part of, delivered with knowing smiles and casual touches that felt too familiar for business partners. I'd catch them exchanging glances during double dates or group gatherings, communicating in ways that excluded everyone else and made me feel like an outsider in my own relationship. She began questioning whether I was ambitious enough for her evolving lifestyle, comparing my steady engineering career to Marcus's entrepreneurial risks and expansive vision for their company's future. "You're so content with where you are," she observed one evening, and it didn't sound like a compliment. "Marcus is always pushing boundaries, always looking for the next opportunity to grow and expand. Don't you ever want something bigger than just designing the same types of structures for the rest of your life?" I realized she was viewing my job security and methodical approach to career advancement as limitations rather than strengths, seeing my preference for stability as a lack of ambition rather than thoughtful planning for our future together. When our 2-year anniversary approached, I suggested a quiet dinner at the restaurant where we'd had our first official date, maybe followed by a weekend getaway to that bed and breakfast she'd mentioned loving. Instead, Brittany insisted on throwing an elaborate party at Willowbrook Estate, a lakeside venue her company had used for several high-profile weddings, transforming what I'd envisioned as an intimate celebration into what felt more like a professional showcase than a personal milestone. "This is our chance to really celebrate what we've built together," she explained while sketching seating charts and vendor timelines with the same intensity she brought to client events. "Plus, it's perfect timing to show potential clients what we can create when we have complete creative freedom." I watched her spend weeks coordinating every detail with obsessive precision, hiring professional photographers to document the evening and inviting an extensive list that included influential clients, industry contacts, and several vendors she wanted to impress with her personal event planning skills. The guest list grew from our original idea of 20 close friends and family to nearly 60 people, most of whom I'd never met but who represented important business connections for her expanding company. Marcus suggested we use this as a soft launch for our new luxury package tier, she mentioned casually while addressing invitations. He thinks seeing how we handle our own celebration will give clients confidence in trusting us with their most important moments. I felt increasingly sidelined as she transformed our anniversary into a networking opportunity, more concerned with creating Instagram-worthy moments and impressing potential clients than celebrating the relationship we'd built together. She consulted Marcus on everything from the floral arrangements to the menu selection, implementing his suggestions about signature cocktails and interactive elements that would make the evening memorable for business reasons rather than personal ones. The venue coordination became a constant source of stress as she juggled our celebration with 3 other events happening that same weekend, frequently taking planning calls during what were supposed to be our private moments together. "You don't understand how important this is for establishing our reputation in the luxury market," she said when I expressed concern about the event's scope exceeding our budget and her available time. Marcus explained that personal events often become the portfolio pieces that land the biggest corporate contracts. I found myself questioning whether she was more excited about showcasing her professional skills than celebrating our relationship, especially when she started referring to our anniversary party as a portfolio event during conversations with vendors and potential clients. The final guest list included Marcus and several other male colleagues from her industry network, and I noticed she seemed more energized about impressing them than creating a meaningful experience for the friends and family who actually knew us as a couple. 2 weeks before the party, she mentioned that Marcus would be bringing a special anniversary surprise, that he'd been planning specifically for our celebration, something she described with anticipation that made me uncomfortable given the increasingly blurred boundaries between her professional and personal relationships. I realized our anniversary had become less about commemorating what we'd shared and more about launching Brittany into the next phase of her career ambitions, with me serving as a supporting character in what felt like Marcus's vision for her future. The evening started beautifully. I'll give Brittany credit for that. Willowbrook Estate looked absolutely stunning with string lights reflecting off the lake and elegant table settings that showcased her impeccable taste for creating magical atmospheres. I'd chosen a vintage watch for her gift, something she'd admired months earlier during a weekend antiquing trip, engraved with the coordinates of the spot where we'd first said we loved each other. It felt meaningful and personal, exactly the kind of thoughtful gesture she used to treasure about our relationship. The first hour went smoothly as guests arrived and complimented the beautiful setup, with Brittany graciously accepting praise while subtly directing attention to the professional photography and carefully curated details that demonstrated her company's capabilities. Then Marcus arrived fashionably late, making a grand entrance with an enormous bouquet of exotic orchids and a small wrapped box that immediately drew everyone's attention. I wanted to commemorate this special milestone with something truly unique, he announced loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, presenting Brittany with what turned out to be custom jewelry featuring her birthstone in an elaborate setting that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The contrast between our gifts was stark and obviously intentional, making my thoughtful but modest present look inadequate by comparison. I watched Brittany's face light up with genuine excitement as she examined Marcus's expensive surprise, holding it up for the photographers to capture while barely acknowledging the watch I'd given her earlier. Throughout the dinner, they behaved with an inappropriately familiar intimacy that made several guests visibly uncomfortable, sharing private conversations and coordinating party logistics like a couple hosting together rather than business partners at someone else's celebration. Marcus suggested we move the cake cutting to the lakeside gazebo for better lighting. Brittany announced to our table, consulting him about timing and photo opportunities without including me in decisions about our own anniversary party. When my brother Dave pulled me aside and quietly asked if everything was okay between Brittany and me, I realized their behavior had become obvious enough that family members were noticing the dynamic. She seems more focused on impressing that Marcus guy than celebrating with you, Dave observed with concern. Are you sure everything's good with you too? I decided to address the situation directly, pulling Brittany aside during a quiet moment between dinner courses. You and Marcus are being pretty obvious tonight, I said quietly, trying to keep my voice calm and private. People are starting to notice how you're acting together. Her response was immediate and defensive, her voice rising enough that nearby guests could overhear our conversation. You're being paranoid and controlling, Ryan. Marcus is my business partner, and if you can't handle me having professional relationships, that's your problem, not mine. The accusation of being controlling stung particularly because I'd spent months watching their increasingly inappropriate boundary violations without saying anything, trying to trust her judgment and respect her professional autonomy. I'm not trying to control anything, I replied, maintaining my composure despite feeling humiliated by her public dismissal. I'm just pointing out that you're paying more attention to him than to our anniversary celebration. That's when she completely lost control, her voice carrying across the entire venue as champagne and emotions loosened her tongue. You want to know the truth, Ryan? Yes, we're sleeping together. Marcus understands my ambitions and supports my dreams instead of holding me back with your boring, predictable life. The entire party fell silent, 60 guests turning to stare at us with shock and horror as she continued her drunken confession. He's better than you in every way that matters, and I'm done pretending otherwise. Now get out of here before you embarrass yourself any further. The words hit me like a physical blow, but what struck me most was the calculated cruelty of choosing our anniversary party, in front of our friends and family, to detonate our relationship so publicly and humiliatingly. For a moment that felt like an eternity, I stood there absorbing the shocked silence of 60 guests who'd witnessed the complete destruction of what they'd thought was a celebration of love. Brittany's face showed a mixture of drunken defiance and dawning horror as she realized what she'd just done, while Marcus looked like he wanted to disappear entirely from the scene he'd helped create. Every instinct told me to fight back, to defend myself, to expose every detail of their deception and make them face the consequences of their betrayal in front of everyone who mattered to us. Instead, I walked calmly to the nearest table, picked up my champagne glass, and raised it toward the stunned crowd with steady hands that surprised even me. "To truth," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the silent venue. "May we all find the courage to live it." I took a deliberate sip, set the glass down with careful precision, and walked toward the exit without looking back at Brittany or acknowledging Marcus's existence. The sound of my footsteps on the gravel path seemed impossibly loud in the absolute silence that followed, broken only by someone's whispered, "Oh my God," as I reached my car. I drove to my brother Dave's house in complete emotional numbness, the shock providing a protective buffer that kept me functional enough to navigate familiar streets while processing the surreal reality of what had just happened. Dave took one look at my face when he opened the door and immediately pulled me inside, asking no questions while his wife Sarah made coffee and quietly canceled their evening plans. "I don't need to know details right now," Dave said as we sat in his living room. "Just tell me what you need." I spent the next 3 days on their couch, alternating between periods of absolute stillness and bursts of activity where I'd handle practical matters like changing passwords and retrieving personal items from Brittany's apartment while she was at work. The messages started within hours of the party ending, beginning with panicked apologies that quickly devolved into blame-shifting and desperate attempts to control the narrative of what had happened. "Ryan, I was drunk and angry and I said terrible things I didn't mean," read her first text at 2:47 a.m. "We need to talk about this like adults and figure out how to move forward." By the next evening, her tone had shifted completely. "Your emotional unavailability and lack of ambition drove me to seek connection elsewhere. I needed someone who understood my dreams instead of trying to hold me back with your boring, safe life." I read each message with detached curiosity, marveling at how quickly she'd convinced herself that her public betrayal was somehow my fault for not being exciting enough to keep her satisfied. Dave suggested I respond to clarify my side of the story, but I realized that engaging with her desperation would only provide the drama she craved and the attention she'd always used to manipulate situations to her advantage. Instead, I blocked her number, unfriended her on all social media platforms, and politely declined when mutual friends tried to mediate or extract details about what had led to such a spectacular public breakdown. "Whatever happened between them is their business," I told anyone who asked. "I'm not interested in rehashing it or taking sides." The silence seemed to frustrate Brittany more than any angry confrontation could have, denying her the emotional reaction she'd expected and leaving her to face the consequences of her choices without the satisfaction of knowing she'd successfully hurt me as deeply as she'd intended. Within 3 weeks of the anniversary party disaster, Marcus apparently grew tired of Brittany's newfound emotional dependency and the dramatic complications she'd brought into his previously uncomplicated bachelor lifestyle. According to my friend Tom, who heard it from his girlfriend who worked in their industry, Marcus had expected a discreet affair that enhanced his ego without disrupting his carefully maintained image as an eligible entrepreneur. Instead, he found himself dealing with someone who'd burned her primary relationship for him and now expected him to fill that emotional void with the same level of commitment and attention she demanded from me. Brittany's calling him constantly and showing up at his apartment unannounced, Tom reported with obvious schadenfreude. Apparently, she assumed destroying your relationship meant he was ready to step into the boyfriend role permanently. Marcus ended their affair abruptly and brutally, telling her that he'd never intended anything serious and that her public spectacle at the anniversary party had made him realize she was more drama than I bargained for. The rejection devastated Brittany, who'd convinced herself that their connection was worth sacrificing our 2-year relationship and that Marcus would appreciate her grand gesture of choosing him so definitively. Word spread quickly through their professional network about the anniversary party incident, with details growing more damaging with each retelling as clients and vendors questioned Brittany's judgment and professionalism after witnessing such a public breakdown. Several upcoming events were quietly transferred to other planners as clients decided they couldn't trust someone who demonstrated such poor personal boundaries and explosive behavior at what should have been a showcase of her capabilities. The business partnership between Brittany and Marcus became increasingly strained as their personal drama affected their professional reputation, with Marcus distancing himself from both the affair and the company to protect his own interests. He's basically frozen her out of major decisions and started positioning himself as the sole face of the business, Tom's girlfriend reported. She went from being an equal partner to being treated like an employee, and a problematic one at that. Within 2 months, their partnership officially dissolved, with Marcus buying out Brittany's share at a significantly reduced valuation, forcing her to restart her career from scratch while dealing with the professional fallout from their personal disaster. Her social media presence became increasingly desperate as she tried to control the narrative, posting vague inspirational quotes about toxic people and knowing your worth that fooled no one who'd witnessed her behavior firsthand. Several mutual friends distanced themselves after realizing that Brittany's version of events bore no resemblance to what they'd actually seen, particularly the friends who'd been present at the anniversary party and heard her cruel words with their own ears. "She's been telling people that you were controlling and emotionally abusive," my friend Lisa informed me with obvious disgust. "But everyone who knows you realizes that's complete nonsense, especially after seeing how calmly you handled her public meltdown." The social isolation seemed to hit Brittany harder than the professional consequences, as she'd always defined herself through her ability to charm and manipulate social situations to her advantage. Without Marcus as her emotional anchor and with her professional reputation in ruins, she found herself facing the reality that her actions had genuine consequences that couldn't be managed through tears or manipulation. 6 months after the anniversary party, I'd rebuilt my life with a quiet satisfaction that surprised me with its depth and authenticity. I moved to a smaller apartment closer to my office, a space that felt genuinely mine rather than a compromise designed to accommodate someone else's expensive tastes and constant need for entertainment. The silence Brittany had once criticized as boring became a source of peace, allowing me to rediscover interests I'd neglected during our relationship and to appreciate the simple pleasure of making decisions based solely on my own preferences and values. My engineering work took on new meaning as I focused on projects that challenged me intellectually, earning recognition from colleagues who noticed my increased engagement and creative problem-solving abilities. I was leaving my favorite coffee shop downtown when I accidentally encountered Brittany for the first time since the party, finding her sitting alone at a corner table with a laptop and what appeared to be job applications spread in front of her. She looked genuinely surprised to see me, her face cycling through emotions I couldn't quite read before settling on something that resembled shame mixed with desperate hope. "Ryan," she said, standing up quickly and knocking over her coffee cup in her haste. "I've been hoping I'd run into you. Could we maybe talk for a few minutes?" I considered her request while studying her appearance, noting the subtle signs of stress and financial strain that suggested the consequences of her choices had been more severe than I'd realized. "I don't think that would be productive for either of us," I replied politely but firmly. "I hope you're doing well though." Her face crumpled slightly at my gentle rejection, and I could see her struggling to formulate an argument that might change my mind. "Please, I just need 5 minutes to explain what really happened that night. I was drunk and angry and I said things I didn't mean, but what we had was real and I threw it away for something that was never going to last." I looked at her for a long moment, recognizing the genuine pain in her voice but feeling no urge to ease her guilt or provide the absolution she was seeking. "Brittany, what happened that night wasn't about alcohol or anger. It was about choices you'd been making for months, and words you'd clearly been thinking long before you said them out loud." She opened her mouth to argue, but I continued before she could speak. "I hope you find whatever you're looking for, but I'm not interested in relitigating the past or helping you feel better about decisions that hurt people who cared about you." I walked away without waiting for her response, feeling lighter with each step rather than burdened by the encounter. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that her event planning business had failed completely and she'd moved back to her hometown to work for her family's small catering company, a significant step down from the luxury market she'd been so determined to conquer. The irony wasn't lost on me that her pursuit of something bigger and more exciting had ultimately led her to a much smaller and more limited life than what we'd been building together. I realized that my quiet strength and refusal to retaliate had been the most powerful response possible, demonstrating a level of self-respect that her manipulation tactics couldn't penetrate or diminish. The painful lesson had revealed my true worth and taught me to value authentic connection over performative relationships, preparing me for something genuine whenever it appeared. A year later, I met someone new at a professional conference, someone who appreciated thoughtful gestures and steady reliability rather than viewing them as limitations to be overcome. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on mutual respect and shared values rather than the intoxicating but ultimately destructive dynamic I'd mistaken for love with Brittany. Sometimes I think about that anniversary party and feel grateful for the cruel clarity it provided, showing me exactly who Brittany really was beneath the charm and helping me understand that the right person would never make me feel inadequate for offering genuine love and commitment.